Welcome to The Complete Works, an official podcast of FilmBook. The Complete Works is a podcast that delves film by film into the filmography of a Hollywood actor, director, writer, or composer.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Complete Works podcast, a film podcast brought to you by FilmBook. My name is Doug Coughlin. If you're tuning into the Complete Works podcast for the first time, what I do on this podcast is discuss a specific movie from a film actor, actress, director, or composer's film career. I'm currently working my way through Tom Cruise's film career, and in this episode of the Complete Works podcast, I'll be discussing the film Cocktail. Find more information about the Complete Works podcast episodes on FilmBook. Now that's film-book.com, or by searching the term The Complete Works. If you're listening to this podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or another podcast service, please rate and review this episode. If you're listening to this podcast on YouTube, please like our video, subscribe, and consider becoming one of our patrons on Patreon at patreon.com/FilmBook. Your support helps us create more engaging content. So, like I said, we're going to be looking at the film Cocktail. Now, the film was released on July 29th, 1988. It runs a little over 103 minutes. In terms of this. So let me just kind of give you a quick overview before we get too far into here about what the film is about, especially if you haven't seen the film Cocktail. So Cocktail, as I mentioned, is a 1988 American romantic comedy drama that was filmed, directed by Roger Donaldson from a screenplay by Heywood Gould, and it's based on Gould's book of the same name, Cocktail. And as we mentioned, it's going to star Tom Cruise, Bryan Brown, and Elisabeth Shue. Now, many of you may remember Elisabeth Shue from The Adventures in Babysitting, and I also believe she was in the first Karate Kid with Ralph Macchio. So this really tells the story of a business student who ends up becoming a bartender in order to make ends meet. He wants to be this rich millionaire, and he tries doing it from running a bar in terms of this. So overall thoughts of this film. It's not one of my favorite Tom Cruise movies, and also we have a little trivia that we'll get into later in the film that even talks about how this is not necessarily one of Tom Cruise's films that he necessarily enjoys in terms of this. So I'm not overly crazy about the film. I think, in honest opinion, the first half of the film works better than the second half. Some of the things that kind of is corny to me in terms of this is that so you have Tom Cruise and Brian in this film, and they're choreographing a lot of their when they're pouring drinks, they're throwing them up in the air, twisting them and making all this it seems more like a music video than it does a film. So that's kind of one of the corny things that I think that's in here. And so, Tom Cruise is trying to play this young ex-serviceman who, like I said, dreams of becoming a millionaire, and he's trying to do it through a bar. And Bryan Brown plays a hard-bitten veteran who has kind of lost his way in several ways, and he provides some cynical advice. And he is trying to advise Cruise to keep his eyes open for a rich chick, because that's the trick, right? Is that someday to open your own bar is making sure that you find some woman that's going to help you finance and start the bar. I honestly, I also would think that if they would have kind of kept it more regarding the two buddies/rivals throughout the film, I think it works better. I enjoy Elisabeth Shue. I think she's a wonderful actress, but bringing her in this love story to me, it just really kind of slows the movie down in terms of that. So again, not a big fan of the overall arching of Cocktails because of that. In terms of that, I think some of the best parts of the film is that when Tom Cruise's character drops out of school, he wants to become a full-time bartender at that point, and then, like I said, he becomes friends with Bryan Brown's character. They become best friends, and that's when they start juggling the bottles of liquor in the air, and really brings some of this choreographed material in, and that's when people in the bar are screaming and shouting. To me, it's a classic 80s move in terms of film, but not something that totally believable, I guess, for lack of a better word there. There's also a lot of one-night stands in here, trying to show the life of a single bartender and trying to find his way. Now, that, I think, is kind of realistic in the process, and to me, that was something that made the movie a little bit more realistic in terms of that. With that, as I mentioned earlier, I think if the film would have been better if it would have just stuck with the relationship between Cruise and Brown. But as we have to bring in this love story, which Cruise and Elisabeth Shue's character, who happens to be a vacationing waitress from New York, they happen to find true love in the process, which then is shattered when Elisabeth Shue's character sees Tom Cruise's character with a rich Manhattan executive. So he starts to sleep with this executive who is trying to convince Cruise that he can make money being a bartender and having this empire, if you will. So it's kind of an interesting concept, and then as we realize later in the movie, Elisabeth Shue's character becomes pregnant. And did I mention she herself is rich, something that she didn't mention to Tom Cruise earlier, and that puts another twist in the movie. Again, all of this just doesn't feel right. It doesn't feel like it flows in this. So, not a huge fan of the film. I'll rate it towards the end on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being outstanding, 1 being terrible. I'll give you that rating there here in a few minutes. But we will also find out that Elisabeth Shue's character is a millionaire, and that her daddy basically at the end comes in and helps support Tom Cruise. They find true love, they get together, have the kid, and he goes on to be able to keep his bar. Again, the concept of the film is not necessarily terrible. It's just not a film that I enjoyed, to be completely honest with you. What makes an impression in this, and we'll talk a little bit about this with the trivia, with Tom Cruise and Bryan Brown's characters. Both of them had to go to extensive work to be able to get the choreographics down with twirling the bottles and having all the fancy moves. I think that was very impressive, even though maybe a little unrealistic. I think that's something that brought a little bit of character in there. I think just Elisabeth Shue's presence and her style. She's not one of those over-the-top actresses. And to me, she kind of approaches it in a more quiet, subtle way. And I thought that was very impressive and brings depth into Elisabeth Shue's character. So I really enjoyed her portrayal. Like I said, I'm a fan of hers anyways. And I thought her character brought a little bit of depth and something that actually if anything, kind of helped save the movie, in my opinion. Tom Cruise and Brown, I thought they were a little bit too over the top in that. Now, again, they were trying to be bartenders. They were single, and they were trying to make their impression and make their run and make their money. I get it. And I think you have to have the good cop, bad cop concept in the film to make it work. I think everybody kind of does their job in terms of that, but still, just wasn't a huge fan. Not necessarily against the relationship, and when I say this, I meant the on-screen chemistry between Cruise and Brown. I thought it worked a little bit. Again, I'm not 100% sure as I'm rethinking this, as I'm talking, and again, Tom Cruise is great, Elisabeth Shue is great. I'm just not sure that their chemistry on screen really worked. I think Brown and Cruise had a much better chemistry than Elisabeth Shue and Tom Cruise. Again, not a negative towards either one of them. Sometimes that just doesn't happen, that chemistry doesn't work. A big fan of both of their works, and sometimes you just swing and miss in terms of that. So the chemistry there wasn't always, kind of spot on. Something that I think could have been a little stronger there in terms of that. When we start to look at films with other genre against other directors and films of the time, and when I say that, meaning of the 80s, some degree, I think it really fit into the 80s. The film genres in terms of that. I'm trying to think here real quick of some films off the top of my head that would work with that. I kind of thinking of some of the Brat Pack type of films that would work in there. That's kind of going to my head. A lot of other genres with that. Unfortunately, I'm kind of drawing a blank in terms of that. Romantic comedies of the 80s. Oh, geez. Why am I going completely blank? Let's see what we can come up here. So you have romantic comedies, Working Girl, starring Harrison Ford, is in there. Mystic Pizza with Julia Roberts is in there. Eddie Murphy, Coming to America, Big with Tom Hanks, are some other films from 1988. She's Having a Baby, Kevin Bacon's in that. Punchline, another Tom Cruise film. So just listening to some of those, in terms of romantic comedies from 1988 and how they compare, I think for the most part, Cocktails is probably, in my opinion, ahead of some of these other ones. I really liked Working Girl with Harrison Ford and Sigourney Weaver. Excuse me. In terms of that, I think that chemistry worked there. Coming to America, even though it's a romantic comedy, Eddie Murphy is good in that. Big and Hanks wasn't one of my favorite Tom Hanks film. Again, I thought he did well in that, but I would put Cocktail up there over that. She's Having a Baby with Kevin Bacon, another romantic comedy that I think Cocktail kind of is ahead of that. That's a very specific genre in terms of that. Punchline, I think, again, Tom Hanks and Sally Fields is in that one from 1988. again, I don't think it works for them. I know a lot of critics at the time wasn't a big fan of Punchline. Again, the topic was there. So I think for the most part, Cocktail does a pretty good job of being ahead of the class from 1988 in romantic comedies. I think, and I think it was more romantic than comedy, I would say, where compared to some of these other Working Girls, I would put in that same category. But Coming to America, I think is more comedy than romantic. Again, not saying it doesn't have things in there. Again, Big, I think, is more comedy. Punchline was more comedy. She's Having a Baby was more romantic than comedy. Again, not saying that there wasn't some of that in there. There was. I think they were just a little bit heavy on one than the other in terms of that. So, yeah, I think that's how I would rate that film in terms of being compared with others from that genre. When I say the film is good, it's okay, average at best in terms of that. Again, I think I covered a lot of that. I think the chemistry between Brian and Tom Cruise works. I'm not sure that the chemistry between Tom Cruise and Elisabeth Shue works. Again, not saying anything about their talent and what they do on the screen. It's just that they just didn't have the chemistry that I would like to see in terms of that. Do I think it was a bad movie? No, I don't think it was bad. I think average at best. So if I'm going to give it on a scale of 1 to 10, with 1 being terrible, 10 being outstanding, I'm probably going to give it a 6 in terms of that. Just a little slightly better than average in there. And I think a lot of that is because I like Tom Cruise and Elisabeth Shue, so I'm probably going more on just personality and how I like them as an actor or an actress than I really do again with that chemistry in terms of that. So again, I'm just going to say it's an okay film. Some of it was because I think it was a little unrealistic in terms of that, especially in the scenes in New York where he's twirling the bottles. I just think that was unrealistic. Again, I think it makes for a great show, but really unrealistic. But I also think that's 80s style. I think that sets perfectly with the 80s in terms of that. What are some other things about the film that I didn't necessarily care for? When they go to Jamaica and they're setting up this bar, Elisabeth Shue's character, the falling in love, the breakup, and then coming together, trying to find, now that we realize that she's pregnant, and that she's not telling him that she's rich, but she's there as a waitress, and Daddy kind of comes in and saves them. Again, I get it. It's for the movie. It's part of the film. But I'm telling you, overall, it just didn't really work for me in terms of that. It wasn't the worst movie I ever saw, but it wasn't one of the best films that I've seen in terms of that. Let's go on to a little bit of some information. So I understand that the budget was approximately $20 million. Of course, keep this in mind, this was 1988, and at the box office it made $171.5 million. In terms of that, we talked a little bit about the cast. Tom Cruise, Bryan Brown, Elisabeth Shue was in there. In terms of that, the script is like I said, is based on Heywood Gould's semi-autobiography novel published in 1984 because Gould had worked as a bartender in New York from 1969 to 81 to support his writing career. And Gould has said to have said he met a lot of interesting people behind the bar, and very rarely was it someone who started out wanting to be a bartender. They all had ambitions, some smothering and some completely forgotten or suppressed, end of quote. I thought was kind of interesting there when it came to the script on that. So let's get into a little bit of the trivia. This is one thing that I really love about this. So Tom Cruise bartending training was held at the bartending school in Toronto, Ontario. At one point, the instructor refused to teach Cruise how to flip bottles in glasses because in a real bar setting, that would be too high risk for damage and a huge potential for lawsuits. Kind of what we talked about in terms of that. The film was made and released 4 years after its source novel of the same name by Heywood Gould. In terms of that, Paul Newman was the studio's original choice for Doug in hopes to reunite him. Now, Doug would have been Bryan Brown's character with Tom Cruise and kind of repeat the success of The Color of Money from 1986. In terms of that, Robin Williams was considered for the role of Brian Flanagan, which was played by Tom Cruise. Williams had previously starred in Club Paradise in terms of that. But he would be in Roger Donaldson's next film, Cadillac Man, in 1990. In terms of that, the boxing fight match shown on TV is a heavyweight bout between George Foreman and Ken Norton. In terms of that, the film is listed among the 100 most enjoyable bad movies ever made in John Wilson's book, The Official Razor Movie Guide. So couldn't agree with more. It's kind of an enjoyable bad movie. It's a film that, I'd seen it years and years ago and then rewatched it for this recording, but not probably a film that I'm going to want to watch again anytime soon in terms of that. The movie's popular song Kokomo by the Beach Boys was a Golden Globe nominated in '89 for Best Original Song. And Tom Cruise at one point fell sick from swimming in extremely hot waters in Jamaica. Okay, here, the place where star Tom Cruise, in preparation for his role as a cocky bartender in this film, trained and practiced cocktails, bartending, and flair bartending, according to October the 21st, 1987 edition of the Los Angeles Herald-Examiner, was at John Clancy's Seafood Restaurant in New York City. Jennifer Grey, Demi Moore, Ali Sheed, and Jodie Foster, Daryl Hannah, Sarah Jessica Parker, and Jennifer Jason Leigh were all considered for the role of Jordan Mooney, which was with Elisabeth Shue's character, which would have been interesting if some of these other would have made it. Would they have had a better relationship, chemistry on screen with Tom Cruise? I don't know. I mean, that's one that we'll never know. We'll see. Both star Tom Cruise and Elisabeth Shue had to endure extremely hot weather conditions while shooting in Jamaica. According to the 80s movie Rewind website, Tom Cruise was married to Minnie Rogers at the time, and it was rumored that they fought offset constantly. Mimi Rogers. Let's see here. Heather Graham was offered the role of Jordan Mooney, but declined due to scheduling conflicts with A License to Drive in 1988. The man seen twice in Jamaica sitting at the bar while Tom Cruise is tending to James, who is known for playing the father of Brenda and Braden on Beverly Hills 90210.